2 minutes.
Nope. T-minus 30 seconds. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon's council meeting. I'm calling it to order at this time and turning it over to Councillor Forder for our land acknowledgement.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. We would like to begin by acknowledging that we are meeting on the traditional lands and treaty territory of the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, which includes the Chippewas of Nawash, unceded First Nation, and the Chippewas of Saugeen First Nation. We also recognize the Métis, whose ancestors shared this land and these waters. We extend our gratitude to all Anishinaabe and Métis people and their descendants, past, present, and future, who continue to care for and inhabit these lands and tend these waters.
Now I'll just ask you to join me in a moment of silent reflection on today's business. Thank you. Is there any disclosure of pecuniary interest? Seeing none, just a reminder that you can bring it forward if it occurs to you when it does. Announcements around the horseshoe. Any announcements, Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Your Worship, and good afternoon, everyone. And with your indulgence, I have 3 announcements today. And the first one, as everyone knows, the annual Summerfest weekend is upcoming from August 2nd to the 4th. And there are so many events this year that I'm going to read through them fairly quickly. It's incredible. Friday evening is a movie, Under the Stars, from 6 until 8 p.m. Dress up as your favorite Back to the Future character for a chance to win prizes. And obviously, we'll be watching Back to the Future from the Market Square. Saturday begins 8 a.m. with a community-wide yard sale. There's a beautiful Joe Dog Parade starting at 9 o'clock. Also at 9 o'clock is the Canine Water Sport Canada event, and I understand dogs will be jumping into quite a large pool of water. The Poutine Off runs Saturday and Sunday, and I think we've got, is it 21 restaurants participating in the Poutine Off? So you want to get out and don't worry about your waistlines, eat lots of poutine. And the sidewalk sale downtown begins at 10. Doors of Meaford, which is really special. That's Saturday and Sunday, where artists will be coming to paint the doors of our downtown. The Jeep Invasion, if anybody saw that last year, it was really fun. That starts at 10 a.m. There's a live podcast by prior local resident Jenny Besworth, and that starts at 12 at the steps of Meaford Hall. There's a free flow visual artistry performance between 2 and 5, and there's a street dance, 60s Revisited, starting at 7:30 p.m. And that's just Saturday. And Sunday is the sidewalk sale and food trucks from 10 a.m. till 4. The Jeep Invasion again at the harbor from 10 o'clock till 4. And the Canine Water Sport again. And the Poutine Off continues. And you'll need to get a passport to participate in voting for the best poutine. Those are $2, and you can pick them up at the Keep Refillery, the Crystal Dragon, Craig Gallery, Little Wren Hair Studio, the Red Apple, and the Chamber of Commerce. So everybody, please come out and support this community. It's just a very fun, wonderful event happening this weekend. Or actually the August 2nd to the 4th, but we won't be meeting again before that. And July the 23rd, coming up this week, is Vanilla Ice Cream Day. And who knew there's a Vanilla Ice Cream Day? But in any event, that is another of our 150-year sesquicentennial celebrations. So that is going to take place at the Curling Club. And this is in support of our Ag Society. And that's from 1 until 4 o'clock on the 23rd. You have to come and eat vanilla ice cream. And lastly, but certainly not least, I want to give a huge shout out to a local resident, Dave Brown, and his team. For the last number of days, you've seen them out and about downtown, and they've been pulling weeds. And they've taken it upon themselves to volunteer to do this to help make our downtown beautiful. And we really, really appreciate you, Dave, and everything that you're doing for your hometown. We know you love it here as much as we do, and thank you.
Anyone else? Councillor Greenfield.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, again, a civic holiday weekend, a special event being held not in the urban area, but certainly in our municipality. Electric Eclectics, starting on the afternoon of August 2nd and continuing to noon approximately on August the 4th. This is an amazing light and music event. I'm not sure how long this event's been taking place. I'm going to say 20 years. It's been with us for a long time. The location is at 202 Scotch Mountain Drive Deviation. And for anyone who hasn't never been up there, as well as the noise and the light, this is one of the most beautiful viewscapes in all of our municipalities. So quite an interesting show. Thank you.
Other announcements? Councillor Uhrig.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I'll give a plug for the Meaford Chamber of Commerce. They're having their monthly After 5. Tomorrow's is going to be at 5 p.m. at the Bayside Chrysler Dodge Jeep Ram location. So again, an opportunity for local business people and residents who may not have had a chance to see this business, or just a good chance to network with other businesses in the area. So it normally goes from about 5 to 7. Tomorrow, that's the 23rd. Thank you.
Announcements, the other side of the horseshoe, Kim.
Thank you. Just thank you to residents for their patience. We're doing a lot of resurfacing both in the urban and the rural areas. So great appreciation for making space and place for our team to do the work. And then just a reminder that the Tom Thompson Trail is closed. They do have that update on their website. So again, just if people are out going to be hiking in that area, it's just closed again for some of the work that we're doing out there.
Is that everybody? Okay, thank you. We'll move on to public participation. Members of the public are encouraged to provide council with their comments and questions. Presentations must be prearranged with legislative services before the agenda is released and will be limited to 10 minutes. If a member of the public wishes to make a deputation on items on the council agenda or to ask a public question of council, they may do so either in person at the council chambers or remotely via Zoom. Members of the public wishing to make a deputation or to ask a public question must register in advance with legislative services by 10 a.m. on the morning of the meeting. And you can do that by contacting the deputy clerk at meaford.ca or calling 519-538-1060 extension 1110. An email with access information will be sent to those who register for remote participation. Deputations are limited to 5 minutes and questions to 2 minutes. And just a reminder, the public can watch this meeting live via the Municipality of Meaford's YouTube channel, www.meaford.ca/YouTube. And we do have a presentation today, and it's my pleasure to introduce Andrea Matrasovs, the Mayor of Town of Blue Mountains. Welcome to our humble abode, Andrea.
Thank you very much, Your Worship, and good afternoon to Your Worship, Deputy Mayor, and all councillors. It is a pleasure to be here as the neighboring mayor, but I am also very excited to be here wearing my hat today as a regional leader for the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Cities Initiative. I understand that you had a very detailed presentation from Eamon, one of our staff members of the organization, and the invitation was to come out today and be able to respond with some questions and answers about how it's meaningful for us as a local, smaller scale municipality to be part of the organization. So Your Worship, I prepared 3 brief points that I'll just outline just to say about what it is that I have experienced since being both a councillor and the mayor of the town of Blue Mountains with the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Cities Initiative. And then I'll be available to answer questions. So one of the reasons why I got quite excited when the previous mayor sent me down to the AGM for the Great Lakes down at St. Catharines in 2022 as his designate because he was unable to attend. We were going down because we were receiving an award, and I'm going to talk, that's going to be one of my points about what the kind of value that we have. But what impressed me was the ability to be able to build a community around a commonality such as our Great Lakes watershed. And having been the vice chair of Grey Sauble Conservation Authority and also having sat on Nottawasaga Valley, I already saw the value of making decisions and being guided to make our own independent municipal decisions based on what it means for the whole watershed. So this was a concept that hit home to me because it allows us to go to look at what I call the Uber watershed, the larger scale, because whatever we do up here will have an effect on the water that runs through in Montreal. So we are in this together and we want to be able to benefit from being in it together. So I found that was really quite the motivator behind the networking aspect. That's the first of the 3 points. To be able to go down to the AGM, for example, in St. Catharines, but also to participate in some of the opportunities that I'll point out in my point number 2. It is the chance to be able to not be trying to invent everything on our own. It's the chance for us to be able to say, we have this issue too. Oh, what have you done about that? What can we do? So that certainly has been part of it. And it doesn't seem to matter that you're in a room full of Mississaugas and large scale cities, because we all have the same kind of caretaking and stewardship about the waters. We just have different perspectives on how we interact with it. And I think it's very valuable that you are with us as well as ourselves, the smaller communities that are there at the table, because it makes sure that the policy and the programming that gets developed through the Great Lakes is paying attention to what it means for smaller municipalities as well. So that's one of the pieces of value that you're bringing back to the organization by choosing to participate as an independent member. So certainly that has been very valuable. And that does lead into my point number 2, which is about the educational value. I have attended many of the lunch and learn webinars and sessions, and I was so very pleased that one of the ones that I chaired last week was actually attended by your deputy mayor. Deputy Mayor Keaveney was able to attend that, and perhaps she'll share a bit more about her takeaways from that. But that's because I've agreed to co-chair the Water Equity, Mayor's Commission on Water Equity. And what we really wanted to do in that particular session was be able to engage and get feedback from municipalities all across Ontario about what that means for us and the kinds of shared needs that we have, such as water infrastructure, both water and wastewater. So big topics. I took copious notes. That's really going to guide us towards that commission in terms of what we can do to provide value back to the municipalities. So that is certainly one of the things. And the AGM, I should mention, next year it is in Milwaukee, and the year after that it'll be back in Ontario. So it takes a shift between Quebec, Ontario, and the States. And I highly recommend participation by yourself, your worship, or your designate, because it is very valuable. It's more than just the business meeting. It is like a mini conference. There are workshops and panels all through the days that we're there. They make sure that if you're going to come and travel, that it's going to be worth your while. So it's another opportunity to be able to bring some of that knowledge back here in the decisions that you make here at your council table. And the third part is the grants and awards. So I mentioned that we had received in 2022 that award. It was called the WEGI Award, and it's actually $7,500 American that's offered each year to smaller communities. So you fit in that category, and so do we. And we actually earned it in 2016 as well. So in 2016, this is before I was on council, in 2016, the town of Blue Mountains did a solar retrofit of a street lighting, or not street lighting, but parking lot lighting using solar power. And that one qualified. We won the award for that. Then we came to the styrofoam recycling. And I know that you've jumped on board with that program too. Well, we actually earned $7,500 towards that initiative that we took in 2022. And the reason why is because it's very simple. It's that the WEGI Award recognizes innovative sustainability initiatives led by small communities. So you have to be under 100,000. So it means we're not competing with the big ones, that can be showcased as best practices for other communities. And that is really the premise of it. And in conclusion, it actually points towards the fact that it's not just about the watershed and about the environmental sustainability, but the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Cities Initiative focuses on the economic sustainability of our municipalities as well as the social sustainability. So for all three reasons, that's the reason lots of projects you're probably working on right now could be a qualifier to be able to apply for the next year. And it's very simple too, not too daunting for staff. It's just a 2-page, maximum 500 words put together, because I know as we chase after all the grants, sometimes that can be very cumbersome to produce the packages. It is one of the ways that the St. Lawrence and City, Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Cities Initiative assists municipalities as well. Deputy Mayor Keaveney asked the question in our session about, can you provide us with assistance on a list of all the grants that are out there and some assistance on the best ways to put those application packages together. Again, it's that critical mass that allows them to do that and offer it back to the membership. Your Worship.
Thank you very much, Andrea, and I really appreciate you coming and giving us a first-hand account, which is quite a bit more elucidating than the report we had via Zoom before. Any questions for Andrea this afternoon, Deputy Mayor?
Thank you very much, Your Worship, and I want to add my appreciation to Mayor Matrosovs for taking time to come and speak to our council, because yes, we did have a wonderful presentation from Eamon, but it was fairly high level, and I thought it would be really valuable for our council and staff to hear a little bit more about what's happening here locally, because you've been involved in this now for a number of years. So that's really, really valuable. You mentioned the Zoom session last week, and I was very happy on Thursday to be able to participate in that. And one of the major takeaways for me was the fact that, as you mentioned, all large communities and small communities, we all have common challenges. And there was a lot of discussion about infrastructure because there were a lot of staff members present in this Zoom session. And we realized that everybody's got a water or a wastewater issue. So that comes down, of course, to funding. So I'm wondering, Andrew, if you could speak a little bit to the lobbying that this initiative does, and the fact, I believe, that you will be at AMO, and perhaps there will be some discussions at that level as well about funding that's needed for our smaller communities.
Thank you. Through you, Your Worship. Indeed, building on when we're gathered together anyway, such as AMO, it's a good time for the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Cities Initiative to be there as well. And certainly that has sorry, I'm just going to reframe that. So that is certainly the reason why we get together. But what we do with that is the question you're asking: what kind of advocacy? So I have participated on Parliament Hill in Ottawa. They do the same thing down in Washington. And then when we go there, what we're doing is we're focusing in on the commonalities again and what we can do to work with whoever, not just whoever's in power, but we actually met with all four parties when we were there. So we would go and we would take the opportunity to meet, be able to explain what it's like from the lower tiers and how we can address the common issues. And it was those kinds of things. The Canada Water Agency, we don't take full credit for it, but we do take part credit for it, because that was one of the things that we said. People are recognizing that fresh water is the new gold, as they say. It's the new oil. We have to focus on how to protect it and how to make sure that we're using it in a responsible stewardship way. And that was one of the makings. That was one of the things that we had said to the federal government is, please stop focusing only on salt water, because the tradition was that the federal level would look after the outer shores and that they would leave it to the provinces, et cetera, to deal with the rest of it. And we've realized you can't draw that line anymore. You have to really pay attention. So that was one of the ways in which they listened, and they said, okay, then that way we understand. And to my surprise, when I got involved with the organization on that example, is that the US is far ahead in terms of providing funding for the health of our waters here. They had rivers on fire. They had big crises happening across the border, and that's how they responded. They had the US Army Corps actually get dedicated towards doing the studies and the coastal resiliency on the other side. And yet we here in Canada, we're falling behind because we weren't putting the same kind of commitment and dollars towards it. So that's why we've been very pleased to see the needle moving on the federal level of funding. But let us help you make the decisions on how to spend that money, because we're the ones who actually see it at the micro level.
Any other questions? Councillor Urick?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Andrea. Great presentation. It's very helpful. You did mention in there the Grey Bruce Sawmill Conservation Authority, and Councillor Bell and myself were both on that body. Do the conservation, does Conservation Ontario, are they a member? Obviously, this is municipally driven. That's regionality. Are they part of it as well? Or I'm sure they play a role, but what role do they play?
Through your worship, absolutely, as a partner, not as a member, because it's municipalities that are members, but definitely as an active partner. And that's the reason for putting in for the funding to get the coastal resiliency dollars together from the federal level, is to work with. In our case, we're so lucky to have the conservation authorities in Ontario. That doesn't exist in other provinces across the country. And it's like a jewel. People look at that and go, how do we do that? Because it's so important to look at the whole watersheds. So definitely they are, I have seen in the 2022, since I've been there, at first it was just, this would be nice to, and now they're there at every big meeting. They're there. They attended the regional meeting that I hosted over at the chamber over in the town of Blue Mountains. They were there. They made a presentation as well. So definitely, because that is a value. And as the role of the conservation authorities is shifting and the mandate is changing, more than ever, this is our opportunity to keep paying attention to what happens in the watershed as a whole.
Councillor Ford.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you. Hi, Andrea. Thank you for taking time out of your busy day today to be with us. We appreciate it. I would just like to know, how do you see this initiative sort of evolving in the next coming years, and what role do you see for its member municipalities in this evolution, please?
Great question, because actually, as I'm sure you heard from Eamon, it originally started with the mayor of Chicago and the mayor of Toronto going, the fish don't have passports. So what we do on one side makes a difference on the other side. How do we work together? So that's the way it began, and that's the way it continues, definitely. But I think looking for, if I understand correctly because I wasn't there 20 years ago, but if I understand correctly, more and more we're focusing in on the concrete measurable deliverables that we can bring back to the municipalities. So in the very early days, it was so very much focused on that advocacy, being able to speak in Ottawa altogether, because it does work. When you walk in there and say, no, we're not just one municipality, we're 260 municipalities. They listen, they pay attention, they say, okay, if you can tell us how to problem solve, this is going to be a winner for everybody. So that continues, but people are asking, also, what can you help us do right now? And that's what those points were that I laid out. The workshops and sessions are probably fairly new I know that they are happening like previously to when I started getting involved in the previous term of council, but more so we're asking for that. The membership is asking for that kind of support, and that's where we look. We did have a discussion in the most recent one about there's more that they could do, but then there are higher costs involved as well. So things like actually providing technical expertise, that might be a little bit beyond the range of what we can expect our membership dollars to provide for. But what we can do, though, is make use of the excellent research and tools that the staff have there at the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Cities Initiative. So now Mayor Kettner, as an individual member, rather than just through Grey County, has the ability to say, hi, we're working on this issue. We wonder what else is happening out there, and if you can direct us to where we can do some further work, and you'll have a good starting point. And I don't think that was necessarily part of the very early days. It was more of the advocacy back then.
Councillor Greenfield.
Thanks, Your Worship. Through you to Andrea. Thanks, Andrea, for your presentation. Councillor Urick mentioned Grey Sawmill Conservation Authority. I have the honor of being on our Saugeen Valley, Grey Sawmill, North Bruce Peninsula Source Water Protection Committee, and I'm kind of surprised I haven't really heard the Great Lakes Initiative hardly even mentioned on that group, and which to me is kind of strange because, of course, they deal with surface water situations too. So, can you suggest a way that maybe we can at least? I'm sure we're aware of the initiative, but maybe get more involved with the organization.
Through your worship, that's an excellent question. I'm glad you've asked that at this point in time because the new Mayor's Commission on Water Equity is about that, and it is new. So I was just named as one of the two co-chairs from Canada, and I have two co-chairs from the States. So the four of us are working together on this commission. In the past, the US was quite focused on water quality and source water because they're still dealing with so much lead in their pipes, for example. So they had urgent issues, and it was quieter on the Canadian side. And then we started realizing, wait, this is a discussion that we have to have as well, because we know that we need safe drinking water, but we also need to take care of the infrastructure of our wastewater too, because we can't have the two contaminating each other. So that is the early part of the conversation. And that webinar that we did last week was the first active piece of getting involved in that. So I fully expect, I guess, because of my background with the conservation authorities, to be able to engage the network of source water protection committees that we have, because we're talking about the same language and we'd like the same kind of input. So if somebody's not catching us through a webinar, it's our chance to come out to organizations such as that and say, what can we do to make sure every community in our Great Lakes and St. Lawrence basin has access to clean, safe drinking water?
Okay, thank you very much, Andrea. We appreciate your, yes, I'm just going to introduce you, Mr. Ashmore.
Thank you very much. I have a question from Madam Mayor.
Oh, I see. You'd like to ask a question. I don't know whether that's in order or not, but I think that I'm sure Andrea would be happy to answer your question.
No, it's okay, I can speak up.
I think for the recording.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, for the presentation now. I have a question for you. Are you aware of the Great Lakes Fisheries Trust?
Yes.
Basically, it's a trust that was set up to compensate Indigenous tribes and cities for the loss of fish at the open loop pump storage plant named Luddington. And basically, funds were paid by the owners of the Luddington open pump storage plant to this trust, and then paid out to these Indigenous tribes. There was huge amounts of fish losses, so things were calculated and paid out. And here we are in Ontario now.
Do you have a question?
The question is, you voted for TCE Energy pump storage plant in the positive. Were you aware of the fish kill level in Michigan, where the state legislature has said they'll never have an open loop pump storage program again? Were you aware of those facts?
Your choice. You'll have to give Andrea the mic to respond. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. And yes, I have done extensive research, and I have given my response both at the Grey County level as well as our town level. But I'm here to represent the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Cities Initiative. That's my hat that I'm wearing today as the regional leader. And I'm free to answer any further questions from council, Your Worship.
I think we're done, and thank you very much, Andrea. Okay.
Thank you very much for your time, and have a good summer.
I'm going to call on Mr. Ashmore now he has two spots on our agenda under the public section. And the first is a deputation, and I want to go on record. Deputations are 5 minutes, and I think I put on Facebook that they're 2 minutes. So that please accept my apologies and register that in your mind. Deputations are 5 minutes. So Michael, welcome back. You're speaking today on the land acknowledgement, and that's an agenda item, which is why we were able to deal with it as a deputation now. So go ahead.
Thank you for allowing me to speak.
I think we need to put your mic on though.
Thank you very much for allowing me to speak. First of all, I'd like to preface my comments with all Canadians are equal, and any laws enacted should ensure that That fact remains. Today, there's far too many people calling racism, etc. So I'd like to get that fact in first. I don't believe any human being is better than another. Now, there's 3 issues that remain outstanding from my prior council appearances that are on today's agenda, and I would like to see them addressed by council. Firstly is the land acknowledgement, where the town continues with an incorrect acknowledgement. There's no evidence that Son ever settled in St. Vincent Township or Treaty 18 areas. There was a motion to review and nothing has transpired yet. So please address this. I am perfectly happy to go and meet with anyone who wants to discuss the facts of settlement in this area on the Indigenous basis. So please give me a call. I'll be glad to go and talk to someone. No one has ever called me yet. So, secondly, there was a referendum request which appeared in the prior minutes and should be addressed. So please address that request for a referendum on the 26th of October, 2026, where the town of Meaford does a yes/no vote on whether we're a willing host to TCE. Lastly, there were engineering reports provided by a local resident and a professional engineer. Mr. Stephen Carr, they should be carefully considered and replied to. The questions that TCE have refused to answer and have still not answered, I heard by rumor and discussion with the councillor that TCE said there was only one question in his entire presentation and they replied to it. That is not true when I discussed last night with him. TCE fibbing again. So they've still not answered, and it should, again, please follow up the need for full disclosure as claimed by TCE. These questions should be publicly answered. So please answer our questions. I've sent correspondence also, so the correspondence is the basis for the questions, but I'm asking you now so they could be considered during this meeting. So I thank you for that.
Can I just offer a suggestion that you consider forwarding that particular question to our Pump Storage Advisory Committee? I think that they are far better equipped than council. I mean, council is standing by to take their advice on questions in the public mind. And I think they are much better equipped to answer your question. And I would strongly recommend that, you know, or we can put the question to them. At any rate, that's where I think we will likely find a more satisfactory answer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I did copy both the council and the Pump Storage Advisory Committee, so that any correspondence is there at both places.
Right. I think you'll get satisfaction there, and I think it will be very, helpful to council as well. So.
Okay. Please bear in mind, Mr. Mayor, that I am happy to help if there are questions that arise.
Thank you. Okay. And we have one final public question, which comes to us from Cyrus Irani. And I believe that Mr. Irani is joining us online. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can, Your Worship.
Great. Please go ahead.
Hi there. Good afternoon, Your Worship and fellow members of Council. I wanted to express my appreciation for the opportunity to speak in front of Council and address my concerns. And I do have a question that I'll get to at the end. So my name is Cyrus Irani. I moved to Meaford over 10 years ago, and I love my town, and I raised my family here. But the reason I'm here today is that about 10 days ago, I was the victim of the increasing crime in this community. My bike, along with 4 of my neighbors, were stolen. I reported it to the OPP, and I filed a report. Others did the same when they could find an officer in town. A few days later, I was at the Harbor Run. I talked to a number of friends. They had all had their bikes stolen. We quickly pieced it together through some research that these criminals were operating out of a few locations in town. I was told to go find my bike back, and I was told to go steal my bike back. You know, it's an open secret right now. I think our local children, when I asked them at the bike park, our local children knew who was doing this. You have to just ask around. People write about reclaiming their bikes, but where is the OPP? Where are the police? I know this is a bike theft ring going on. I spent 20 years in Toronto. I know about bike theft. I've had many bikes stolen, unfortunately. But this is not like they're going and breaking locks in the middle of the day. This is going around at night. I have surveillance cameras in my house. I captured what I suspect is the same thief snooping around my property a few nights ago. My wife and children are here sleeping at home. What does it take for the OPP to recognize this could escalate? I certainly hope it doesn't, but I don't think citizens of this town are happy and content and feel like we can thrive when this is happening every single day to people all across our town. I've quickly realized, we're not alone. These robberies are accelerating. They're becoming break and enters. I know the OPP is taking care of some of the break and enters where they have footage. I recognize that's something they could do, but these other robberies are happening in broad daylight. People are trespassing. It's becoming more dangerous. It's threatening the quality of our life. So the question I have before the council is, what options do we have to discuss this, or for the council to discuss and raise this with the OPP to improve the policing situation in our community, to improve the community outreach that's happening so that we can live better, safer lives for ourselves and for our children? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Irani. I can tell you that I have called OPP headquarters on 2 occasions. It neither involved bicycle theft, but I did get a very concerned and appreciative response. I can tell you, and I'm going to turn the mic over to our CAO, Kim Buckton, right now, but I believe you have meetings with OPP officials scheduled within the next 7 days.
Yes, because as it was mentioned, this is not, certainly there's been an escalation in the last couple of weeks, but it has been going on more consistently in the last couple of years, and our neighbors also see that. But that doesn't make it easier by any stretch. So it is already been acknowledged that, thank you, that the OPP and us, we have to work together on both prevention as well as a sense of security in our community. So Sarah and myself are going to be meeting with the new staff sergeant this week, but you as council will also have the opportunity to have the staff sergeant here to speak on the last quarter. And of course, I do think we need to be increasing our programs and what can we really be doing to see real change. So I'm looking to them as obviously the foremost experts to support us, but also just to let everybody know, we have our advisory committee called Strengthening Our Community, and that does meet every, I think it's every 2 months actually. But again, it's another forum just, kind of to say, so that people are aware they can bring these issues, because it is becoming a long-standing. I know that doesn't change the moment and what you need to do in the immediate, but I do think it's a way for us as a community to come together, to be more connected, and how we can actually support each other, both in advocacy to the OPP, to the court system. There's a few different avenues, and also around just general awareness and training of, what should we be doing to, better protect ourselves. So I think that we're moving in the right direction, but we're not there yet.
Thank you, Kim. Does that help you, Mr. Irani?
Yes, it does. I do appreciate it. And I will look out for that, because I'd be happy to become involved in an initiative like the one that was just discussed. And of course, again, thank you so much to you, Mayor Kentner, your worship, for providing this opportunity for me to come and speak.
And thank you for your offer of help going forward. We'll keep the public well informed. I will say another initiative is that we have a new communications director who is at the back of the room, and I think starting to move in the direction of much stronger communications with our ratepayers than what we've been able to do in the past. So now I'm going to move into our consent agenda. There's only one item, so I beg your pardon. Council inquiries, I think, has gotten left off of the agenda. So council inquiries, I'm sure you have one, Deputy Mayor Kivani, go right ahead.
Your worship, thank you, and I apologize for interrupting. Yes, I did have 2, if I may. The first one, I think what caught my attention this past week was the shiny black new pavement on Albury Court. And it got me thinking about our roads, SOTI, and our philosophy of keeping the good roads good, and it seemingly this was a good road. So I know that that fit into the plan, but I wanted to ask our CAO, Kim, if I may, where we're at with the current road SOT. I believe it was 2015, if I recall correctly, that was adopted. So it was a 10-year plan. Are we coming up to the completion of it, and any sense of where we are in accomplishing what was required in that report, and how we might go about revisiting the road SOTI, and how we might change our current, as I say, philosophy of keeping the good roads good going forward, and because we've got some roads in Meaford that really do need some attention.
Absolutely. And I think that's where I think you're right that the approach that we've just started to take won't be completed till kind of closer to the end of August, is to look at all of our plans, our strategic priorities, and to give a progress update, but also have a chance to reflect of some of these plans. As you mentioned, the study was done maybe even prior to the actual report coming out and the plan being published. So some of those studies, as we'll find out, they're doing the best estimates based on methodology, of course, of the discipline. So depending on, and I'll use Aiken because it's one that's close by and often spoken about, but quite often those types of studies will use an estimate of what they think the road conditions can hold over the time period, and then they create a prioritization list, and operationally we keep rolling those priorities forward. To your point about sometimes it does mean we have to stop the clock for a minute and see, has what we predicted happen actually happening, and recalculate, if you will, and or look at our work plans going forward. So that's I often will talk about our work plans and what we're going to be doing in the next kind of month and or the next 2 years. And it is that chance for us, I think, to look at our current reports and master plans, be able to say what actually is our priorities now, bring that to council with our recommendation to possibly reprioritize and or look at different projects in a different way and approach them in a different fashion as well. So I think you'll see that in the fall, in the September and October timeframe on many different areas, roads being just one, or the transportation master plan is just one of those. Yeah.
Councillor Greenfield.
Just following up on the deputy mayor's question, is this good roads first policy not something that Councillor Bartley's infrastructure committee could be discussing? Seems to me that'd be a natural spot to get this on the table.
You're right. We do absolutely have an advisory group on infrastructure, and that is a completely great forum for residents to come forward and bring ideas about what those priorities could look like. And again, studies are the best intentions back in whatever year they're doing it, and it is based on not a crystal ball. It's the the calculations that they have. So as things, again, weather is a major difference, right? The amount of cold, hot, towards potholes, all those kinds of things come into factors. So having that advisory group with infrastructure is absolutely a good avenue for people to come forward and bring their ideas as well.
Councillor Yuri.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So we'll beat this one up. So just curiously, just wondering, because I wasn't on council when that was kind of done and discussed, just wondering the inherent flexibility within the program. Having lived on Elbury literally a year ago, and knowing the condition of the road, and you mentioned Aiken or Trowbridge, there's a number of streets, and we had a couple of people actually obviously sending emails to council saying, why the heck are we doing, Elbury when these other roads are doing? My question, I guess, is, so when that kind of a thing is set up, is there inherent flexibility within for a common sense approach where literally the workers say, why are we doing this road, and coming back to council and staff and saying, should we be doing this? I mean, or literally, are we just following the plan and kind of, I would just like to know the structure of how that is set out.
I think it's two things as well. I guess there's two pieces of work that we see. There's the resurfacing and then there's actually the restructuring. So I think that's where I, I think because our cycle of procurement as well as the lists as that have been agreed upon and directed by council, there isn't probably as much wiggle room as one would like. Like, you know, myself, I come out to my, say, driveway, I could make that decision on the spot. It is a little bit different because of the amount of, I'll say, steps and procedures that are in place. But I think if we work at it, again, in a slightly different fashion, as I'm recommending to the team to do some work plans, to take a look at it. It also, I think there is there's a level of just busy and you forget to pause and reflect. So I think there is an opportunity here to also just pause and reflect of, is this the right process? Are we doing the things in all the right order? And mostly that even, you know, like I say, I've recently had some conversations about the procurement process, and it's 3 meetings to get something awarded. And that could be a month and a half if it's running, you know, perfectly. So most of these pieces of work have a level of procurement involved or a budget cycle. So all of that does take a lot of planning ahead, which may or may not make it the easiest to respond to the weather of the winter. So I think the answer is yes and no, in that how responsive and how agile are we? And then still balance it with discussions at this forum for council. So there's going to be, and we're relooking at what's the perfect amount of responsiveness, agile, get to it, because we know that's the right thing, versus being, you know, thoughtful planning, bringing it forward for approval. It's finding that perfect balance, to be honest with you. So we're looking at that in and of itself, as well as the technical pieces of which road before which road. But I will also say there's obviously a lot more money that goes into a restructuring. So once the condition has been degraded to such an extent, then we're looking at more work, different contractors potentially, as well as far more disruption to that road as well. So folks wouldn't like it, I don't think, right now, you know, going to Memorial Park if there was, you know, not the ease as well. So lots of those types of considerations.
In hindsight, a 3 or a 5 year plan would be a good way of approaching roads. A 10-year plan where there's never a council discussion of what road should come first in that 10-year span is just not working for us at all. Councillor Bartley.
Thank you, Mayor Kentner. And unfortunately, we've turned council inquiries into a discussion. So my inquiry would be, can we bring this back after our break? We have neither one of our staff here for roads. Can we bring it back? Because I think the good roads has been thrown out the window to my last chat. So can we bring it back, have a discussion with the proper staff here? That's my first inquiry. My second inquiry, can we bring a report back and have the proper people here for the policing in the municipality? I doubt that the police have thrown away any complaints over the weekend on bicycle thefts. I'm sure they're working on it, and I'm sure they're going to come up with a solution. But can we put this on an agenda so we can have the proper people here and discuss it? Thank you.
Any further questions? Councillor, Deputy Mayor again.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I appreciate your comments, Councillor Bartley, and we'll look forward to further discussion on the reports. I did have another question for our CAO, and we talked about the weeds getting all cleaned up downtown, which is wonderful. But council did approve the spraying of weeds in the downtown core, and as far as I've noticed, I don't believe there's been an application as of yet. So I'm just thinking, now that they're cleaned up, can we get out there and get a solution on to keep the weeds from coming back?
Yes, we have already done an application in the rural area, but we are in contact with the contractor to come back, of course, and continue the work in the urban area so that we do get those 2 more applications. It's 2 more applications in the urban area, so the downtown core will get done. But I don't actually have a time frame of when that's happening yet from the contractor.
I think that's it for council inquiries, and I have found it on the agenda. Apologies. So the consent agenda, we've only one item, and the recommendation is that we direct the treasurer to make the following non-budgeted year-end transfers: A, $200,000 to the Stormwater Reserve Fund, and B, $10,000 to the Other Park Reserve Fund. And 2, direct the treasurer to make the following transfers to be funded from the 2022 operating surplus. A, transfer $75,000 to the Other Park Reserve to be allocated toward the splash pad. And B, transfer the balance of the 2023 operating surplus to the Information Technology Reserve Fund to implement future financial software needs. Need a mover and a seconder, Councillor Forder and Councillor Bartley. Any discussion on this? We've reviewed it previously. Councillor Forder.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you. So this question is sort of on behalf of, I had a couple residents that had emailed me about this. So the question, I guess, the answer would be more just for public information. With regards to the education portion of the PILT, I had some residents that wanted to know what are the steps being taken to resolve the variance in PILT funding, and what are the potential financial impacts if this remains unresolved? Thank you.
Treasurer Val.
Through you, Mayor Kenner, to Councillor Forder. The amount of the PILT that would be unresolved currently is around $230,000 that we would be losing. Currently, for the last 3 years, I think it's 21, 22, and 23, the province actually came up with the money as a one-time funding amount. For 2024, currently it's sitting in limbo, and we will apply for it again and hope that we get money from them. We don't know what the 2024 amount, whether they'll pay it or not yet, until we get our final billings done in September-ish.
Okay. All ready to vote? All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Next item, the recommendation is, be it resolved that bylaw 2024-38, being a bylaw to appoint a community emergency management coordinator and alternates, be taken as read a first, second, and third time and finally passed. I need a mover and seconder for that, Councillor Greenfield and Councillor Urick. Any discussion on this? Any questions? Councillor Forder?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you. I'd just like to kind of get a synopsis of this newly adopted incident management system. So I'd just like to know how this system could improve our emergency management capabilities and coordination, please.
So I don't believe it's actually a system in of itself. It's the same system that we've used in the last, I think, 2 years, maybe 1 year. Apologies that I don't have that right nailed down. But it's more just the update in the actual individuals in those key roles. So we've had a change of staffing. So we've had a change of designates within the roles, but it is still under the same actual emergency management system. Yeah, sorry. Just probably clarity for the language there.
Ready to vote? All in favor? And that is carried. Thank you. Now we need a motion to move into committee. Oh, sorry, I think I missed one here. The motion is to be resolved that bylaw 2024-39, being a bylaw to adopt an amendment to the fees and charges bylaw, be taken as read a first, second, and third time and finally passed. Mover and a seconder. It's moved by Councillor Forder and seconded by Councillor Bartley. Any discussion on this document? Councillor Greenfield.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just asked, the sign on municipal property now, is that a sandwich board sign? Is that what we're talking about primarily, or is that a different kind of sign? It mentions a fee of $2,000 yearly, and just wondering to what all that might apply.
Through you, Mayor Kenner, to Councillor Greenfield. I'm not familiar with that particular charge. I believe that was in your existing one previous that we passed earlier this year. The reason this is even here is because of the memorial bench. We did not have a charge for a memorial bench, and we went, did some pricing, and that's how much it costs for people to have memorial benches.
Deputy Mayor Keaveney, do you have a little insight into this?
Oh, no, I don't. I'm sorry. I had another question.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Val, I'm also wondering two things, if I may. First of all, to follow up on the signs. I mean, I don't know if it's a year or more ago now, we talked about signs and some of the signs in the municipality that are not paid for by some of the individuals who have placed the signs on municipal property. So I'm not entirely connected to this report, but it just makes me think of wondering where we're at in terms of the removal of those particular signs, or if those particular individuals are now paying for space on municipal property to have their signs.
Through you, Mayor Kentner, to Deputy Mayor Keaveney, I think what I would like to do is maybe do a review of those particular questions that you've asked, because I'm not familiar with which department actually does that. So I would want to look further and maybe be able to report back to you on that.
That would be great. I would appreciate that, Val. Thank you. And Your Worship, may I ask a secondary question?
You may.
And correct me if I'm wrong, please, Val. In the report, it talks about an electronic funds transfer fee of $20. Does that mean we're now able to take transfer payments? Because I thought we weren't set up to do that quite yet.
Currently, we do not. Electronic funds, so we allow for PAPs, so we have EFTs that we automatically take money from people. We do not do wire transfers. We do not do that. There are some companies that have set up that we do a PAP, like Enterprise, for example. We automatically take that out of our account, and we are working on trying to have electronic funds transfers for the smaller companies, like, Knights of Meaford, if we could set them up to automatically pay them in their account. That's what we're working on currently. The $20 is probably, I would think it's a registration fee, I think, and I don't know that we charge it very often.
Okay, you ready to vote on this? All in favor? And that is carried. Thank you. So I need a motion to move into committee of the whole at this time. Councillor Urick and Deputy Mayor Keaveney. And the first item here, we're doing this, by the way, at 1:56 p.m. And the recommendation, the first one item is that committee of the whole receive background report development 2024-20 development charges, completion of background study, and report for public meeting for information purposes. And at this time, I'm pleased to introduce Craig S. Binning, who is a partner in Hemson, our consultant for development charges. Welcome, Mr. Binning.
Excuse me, sorry to interrupt. Can we please get a mover and a seconder for that item? We just did it for the moving into committee of the whole. We'll need a vote, and then mover and seconder for this particular item, please.
Moved by Councillor Bartley, seconded by Councillor Greenfield, and we don't have to vote on that. We just, okay. It's not confusing at all, is it? Go ahead, Mr. Binning. Thank you for your presentation today.
Very good. It's a pleasure to be before council today. Okay, great. Just as the presentation is being loaded, I appreciate that many on council will have already had an opportunity to review it. I'll move through the presentation relatively quickly, but I would invite, if I'm moving too quickly, if you have a question on a particular point, please interrupt me, and I'd be pleased to take it at that time. What I want to do with you over the next little bit is provide you with an update in terms of what has happened to the Development Charges Act, because there's been some significant changes that have occurred, and some of them have been rolled back over the last couple of years. And certainly a fair bit has happened since your current bylaw was passed. And then I'm going to talk about what is it that we've done through this process, talk about how we've developed the forecast of growth for the municipality. Then I'm going to talk about the capital programs. What are the infrastructure needs associated with meeting the needs arising from that development? And then we'll talk about the rates that we're calculating arising from those processes, how they compare with your current rates, and how they compare with rates in other similar jurisdictions in the surrounding area. And then talk about next steps and where we need to go. So what are development charges? For those of you that are new to this or perhaps have put it out of their mind, really it is the fundamental tool made available to municipalities to fund what we refer to as the initial round of capital costs associated with meeting increased needs arising from development. What that simply means is that as new lands are developed, as new residential homes are constructed, as new non-residential space is created, the people that live in those homes and the employees living in those spaces create a demand for municipal services. And to the extent that you have to increase your servicing capacity, this legislation allows you to levy a charge against development to pay for a share of that capital cost. So it's the first round of capital costs, no operating costs, and also you can't use it for state of good repair or asset renewal, although there can be some overlaps with that and that I could speak to later. These can be levied by the upper tier government, so the county levies a charge. School boards can actually levy a charge under their own education legislation, and then the local municipalities such as yourselves. And the concept here is that growth pays for growth. And these kinds of tools are available to municipalities really across the country and through all of North America, really. We recognize that there's a variety of tools available to fund that capital works. There's a series of what we refer to as growth funding tools now. The prime one is the Development Charges Act, and it's going to continue to be the major source of that the municipality has to fund those kinds of works. There's also something called the Community Benefits Charge. It's reasonably new, it's under the Planning Act, and it really only applies against higher density residential buildings. And the building has to be 5 or more stories and have 10 or more residential units, and it's applied against the land value of that property. So fairly limited application here in Meaford, but it is something that can be explored. The other important one is the parkland dedication and cash in lieu provisions also under the Planning Act. But once again, we're focusing on the Development Charges Act today. We also need to recognize that your developers, when they come forward and they're building out their subdivision or doing their site plan, if there's local internal works required, they pay for those directly as a condition of their site plan or their subdivision agreement. That's above and beyond what's paid for from development charges. Development charges are the sort of more macro level infrastructure needs. And then, of course, you have your property taxes, but we recognize that property taxes are really there to fund the operating costs associated with this new infrastructure. They're also important for your asset renewal and state of good repair, some of the comments that were discussed earlier in your meeting. And also, development charges don't fully fund development-related needs, and so you need to use property taxes and utility fees to pay for those things that development charges don't cover off. And as I indicated, the Development Charges Act itself is the legislation that we work under, and it's changed fairly significantly over the last few years. You have a current bylaw passed in 2021, and I will acknowledge I was part of that process. Given the time that we were dealing with, it was really a short-term effort to make sure that you continue to levy charges. We didn't do a fundamental review of the costs, but it was an interim measure to get us to continue to allow the municipality to collect things. So this is an opportunity where we're taking to fundamentally review primarily the costs associated with the infrastructure. And that's what's really driving the rate increases that we're seeing. And I'll come to that in a few minutes. Before passing a bylaw, we have to do the background study, which we've made available to you, and we look forward to making more widely publicly available. And we have to have at least one formal public meeting. And then you can pass a new bylaw. And those bylaws are appealable to the Ontario Land Tribunal. And increasingly, these bylaws are getting a lot of scrutiny from the development industry. So we want to make sure that everything that we're doing through the study process is consistent with the requirements of the legislation. And I believe that what we're coming forward with is concurrent and conforms with all of the legislative tests. So what have been some of these changes? I've got a series of bills up here. It started with Bill 108, which goes back some time. It made some critical changes to the legislation. Bill 197, Bill 23, which was a critical one and really clawed back what municipalities could do under the Development Charges Act. The most significant thing that Bill 23 did is that it required that when you passed a new bylaw, that the rates got phased in over a period of 5 years. So it wasn't until year 5 that you got to your fully calculated rate. That was in place for some time, but it was recognized by the province and by the ministry, and indeed by the development industry, that that was delaying the placement of infrastructure because municipalities didn't have the monies available. And that impacted on the supply of housing. All of this legislation is about increasing the supply of housing, and it's recognized that critical infrastructure is necessary to allow land to be developed and to allow houses to be constructed. And so Bill 185 actually rolled back some of the changes that were introduced through Bill 23, primarily that one about phasing in of the increases. So you're not required to phase in increases anymore, or even the rates themselves. It also rolled back in the eligibility of development-related studies, which was important. So those are a lot of the things that have been going on in the background. And suffice to say that what we're bringing forward in the background study is consistent with all of those legislative changes. You can imagine myself and my colleagues, we've been spending a lot of time rewriting things as this legislation has been on the change. I'm hopeful that we're in a period now where it's going to stay relatively consistent. This next schematic just provides you with an overview of the development charge study process. I'm not going to speak to each and every part, but I'll give you sort of the 2-minute elevator pitch on it. What we have to do is we look and we say, how much is the community going to grow by over our planning horizon? And we're using a 10-year planning horizon for this study of 2024 to 2033. How many more new homes are going to be constructed? How many people are going to live in those homes? How many new employees you're going to attract to the municipality? And how much space are they necessary to accommodate them? And then we've been working together with your staff, with your master servicing studies, with your capital budgets to say, what are the infrastructure needs associated with meeting the needs arising from the development and redevelopment of that land? Then what we have to do is apply a number of legislative tests and restrictions to that. One of the important ones is you might be able to see that box off to the corner that says 15-year historic service level. What that fundamentally means is that we cannot levy a development charge at a level greater than the way in which you provided that service on average over the last 15 years. And so what that means, we look at every service. So for example, in library service, we look at how much square footage of library space have you had available over the last 15 years? How much land have those buildings sat on? How many collection materials have you had in there? What is the value of the furniture and equipment? We do that in each of the previous 15 years. We divide it by the population that existed in the community in that time, and it gives us a value per capita. So unlike other ways of measuring service levels, under the development charges, it's what I often call the value of the capital stock associated with delivering library services is the service level. And we take that amount, let's say it's $100 per capita, we multiply it by the growth anticipated over the next 10 years, and it gives us the maximum amount that we can fund from development charges. That's going to make a little bit more sense when I show you some examples in a few minutes. So we have to apply that test. And then we also have to recognize that some of the projects may actually provide benefit to the existing residents, or maybe in part replacing an asset. So for example, we've got a fire vehicle in the capital program. It's a ladder truck, but the new ladder truck is going to have a greater servicing capacity to it, while it's also replacing an asset. So the replacement portion we can't fund from development charges, but the increase in servicing capacity because of the greater capacity of the vehicle can be funded from development charges, if that makes some sense. So we have to apply that test. If you're going to get any grants or subsidies from other levels of government, we have to net those off. We also have to recognize that if you've got money in your development charge reserve funds, we have to apply it against the program. But fortunately, also, if your reserve is in a negative position, such as library services, we can fund that negative reserve because you pre and placed infrastructure to meet the needs of future growth. We go through all of that, then we're left with the capital share of the capital program that one is related to development, and then secondly is eligible for funding under the restrictions of the Development Charges Act. Then we allocate a portion of benefit to residential growth, non-residential growth, and calculate our development charge rates. Yeah, as I say, as I move through the slides, Hopefully that starts to sort of all come together. I'm going to talk about the development forecast itself. And in the background study itself, there's a lot of detail there in Appendix A. We have anchored it in a number of things. One is the county's own development charge forecast. I recognize that there may be some who feel that that's understated, but we've counterbalanced that by looking at what are the various applications that are before the municipality now. How many units do you looking forward? How many building permits have you been issuing over the last 5 or 10 years? So we sort of tested it against those things. What we're forecasting right now for the next 10 years is that you'll add approximately 635 new dwelling units over that 10-year period of time. You're sitting at around 5,156 today, so that'll increase to almost 5,800. Your population, we estimated 2023, is around 11,700 persons. We think it's going to increase by about 1,100 to 12,790. Now, I've got an interesting line there that I'll try to explain. That says population in new dwellings. And you can see the number is higher, 1,454, greater than the population change. What that means is that statistically, and it's true here in the municipality as well, Meaford, is that newly constructed homes tend to have more people living in them than the base units. And what happens is that it's usually couples in their family forming years that acquire and purchase new homes. And so the occupancy of homes typically reaches a peak in the first 10 years in which it's constructed. And then you can imagine that, and some of you around the room may have done this, you purchased a home when you got married, you had 1 or 2 children, they move out and go to school, now you're down to 2 persons per unit, and then unfortunately, maybe your spouse passes away, or the household changes and you're down to 1 for a period of time before that home gets recycled to a new family. So that's what we're accounting for here, is the fact that the existing population begins to decline, but because you're growing, you get real growth in the municipality. This is a quirk that we have to account for in the development charge calculations. And I've covered it off, hopefully I haven't confused you, but it's a sort of inside the ballpark development charge kind of issue. And then non-residentially, we're estimating that you'll add about 946 employees. And those are people that are working within the geographic area of the municipality for various businesses. And it could be everything from working at a new Tim Hortons or in a bank, or working in a manufacturing industry, or it could be an institutional use as well. So it's a full range of non-residential activity. And we're estimating that you'll construct an additional 64,619 square meters of new non-residential building space. Any questions on the forecast before I move forward? Good. So what I'm going to do now is get into the capital programs, and I'm going to provide you with a fairly high level overview of them. Once again, the appendices of the background study provide detailed lists on each and every project that we've examined together with your staff. And this is just a high level overview. What I'm going to do is for library services, I'll spend a little bit more time just explaining the various column headers. What we've got up top is a summary of the capital program. So for library services, we've got a capital program of just over $1.8 million. There's a little bit of grants and subsidies, 23,000 that we've netted off. And then the benefit to existing share, you can see 50,000 there. That's just accounting for the fact that we're doing a little bit of replacement activities there, so we've netted that off. But the majority of this capital program is related to development. And indeed, a great deal of it is related to what I'll call the negative reserve fund balance, recognizing you've already expanded the library space, you've paid for it, you've got debt financing associated with it, and we're funding that moving forward. You can see the next line, it says maximum permissible DC funding envelope, 655,000. That's that calculation that I was talking about earlier. That's the maximum funding envelope based on your 15-year historic service level. So the maximum amount that we can fund through development charges for this service is 655,000. You can see that that's lower than the amount of the capital program that we consider to be development related. So the remaining amount, the 1,120,000, is under a post-2033 column. What we're saying there is it's still related to development, but you're going to have to include it in subsequent development charge studies and fund it into the future. One quick comment I'll make is, let's say that amount of development that I talked about earlier, let's say you achieve more development than that in the next 10 years. You will fund a share of that 1,120,000. You'll fund, part of that will come in period and funded. If you have a faster rate of development, they will also pay development charges, and that will accrue into your development charge reserve fund and help pay for the debt. So hopefully that all ties together. Once again, as I'm going through the services, if you've got any questions, we can pause. The fire protection services, we have a fairly limited capital program here. You seem to be well positioned. It's about 1,760,000, recognizing that we do have a vehicle here and they're quite expensive. As I already alluded to, what we're looking at here is a ladder replacement and enhancement. And so it's the enhancement portion that we're funding through development charges. The replacement share is 850,000. The incremental piece is that 813,000, but we've also got some remote water sites. So we're not using the full funding envelope here just because we have an identified program. I know there's been talk of potentially other fire vehicles with expanded capacity, and those can be considered moving forward in the future. Parks and Recreation is a really significant capital program here in the town. You know, you're wanting to create really nice amenities to meet the needs of your residents. It's a really beautiful municipality with a lot of opportunity that way. We've got a capital program that is some $9.8 million. There is some benefit to existing here because some of this relates to renewal of existing park infrastructure, but we're also expanding it. So we've removed about 2.1 million. Important to recognize that that will need to be funded from tax dollars. That's shared. We can't fund it from development charges. Fortunately, you've got about $1 million in your development charge reserve fund for the parks. Now that you're getting that program established and now you're starting to spend the money, you've got that up front to help with these costs. And then about 2.4 million of the program we consider be related to development over the next 10 years. Because of the magnitude of this capital program, and some of it's at the back end of our planning horizon, we have allocated about 4.2 million to development beyond the planning horizon, given the amount of growth that you're anticipating. So it will get funded. It's just going to take a little longer than the 10 years, unless the rate of development is faster. And we've got a full range of things here. This is where you'll need to go to the background study, but we've got a number of park developments in Legion Park, Leith Beach, St. Vincent Park, Market Square. We've got outdoor recreation facilities and amenities, playground development, the splash pad itself is in there, and provisions for some additional space and land needs moving forward. Public Works, and this is just what I often call the soft part of Public Works, the buildings and the fleet. It's a relatively minor program, $1.5 million, adding for some additional future vehicles and storage for those vehicles, a sidewalk cleaner. And we're looking, you've got about 900,000 in the reserve, so it'll fund the first share of that, and about 115,000 is what we're proposing to fund through these rates. And as I indicated, development-related studies were sort of not eligible for funding for a period of time, but they're back in. It includes everything from this development charge study, contributions to some of your planning-related studies, Parks and Recreation Master Plan, and the Urban Stormwater Management Master Plan. The roads, water, and wastewater studies are in their own capital program, so they're not identified here, but we do have the provision for the funding of those in the individual programs. So we've got about 500,000 here of studies, of which almost 300,000 we consider related to development, and we've included for recovery. The roads and related capital program is quite extensive given the significant road network here, given the geographic size of the municipality and the works that you're undertaking. Recognizing, of course, that some of these roads that we're making improvements related to development are also dealing with rehab of existing road infrastructure, so we need to account for that. We've got close to $14.5 million worth of works here. About 3.2 million we're saying is simply about some of those rehab activities that we were speaking to earlier. The good thing is that you're leveraging development charge monies to help construct some new and make some of those improvements to various rural roads, to bring them up to a different standard. We've got other road improvements in your industrial park road area. And so all of those works are fairly significant. What we've done is we've said about 5.6 million relates to development within this 10-year horizon. Our feeling is that the program is going to provide benefit probably out more like 20 years. So we've identified about a 4.9 million shares being related to development beyond 2033. And you're going to see that's a fairly common theme with the engineered services. We think your capital programs are going to meet the needs of 20 years of growth rather than 10 years. And so we've just apportioned that accordingly. Yes.
Through your worship, may I ask a question of Mr. Binning? I'm just wondering in relation to this particular slide, we don't see bridges mentioned. Are bridges included in related, or are bridges not covered at all by DCs? Where do bridges fit in?
Yes, through the mayor, bridges, crossings, culverts, all of those things are eligible for funding. They may be identified in individual road projects. Like, I'm sorry, I can't say off the top, but if there are any development related needs for roads or for bridges and crossings, they're incorporated in the program.
Councillor Bell had a question.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Possibly you're going to be doing a slide on my question later, and it's so cool. So when a developer, we see a lot of development now, the DC charges, up here you're saying rural collector roads and rural things. So does that mean, because your report said you're not doing an area specific rating, so somebody doing a development out in a rural community putting something up, those DC charges just go into our accountant here, and at budget time we get told how much money's in the DC profile. Have I got that kind of right? No area rating, nothing area specific, municipal wide application.
Yes, through the mayor, I think there's just several questions there. The first and the foremost one is, yes, we're proposing a municipal-wide development charge, certainly for the roads network, and that's the most common approach, recognizing the integrated network of our road and that people are going from the rural area to the urban area and vice versa throughout the municipality. So the roads are done on the municipal-wide basis. Water and wastewater services, for the linear components, the town or the municipality has employed some area rating before. We're moving that to one serviced area approach under this bylaw and this study, so that anyone within the municipal water and or wastewater service area will pay the same rates under what we're proposing now. So no more area rating. And the monies are collected and reserved in that way. And then as a project comes forward, if it's development related, then council has the ability to make the draw and pay for that road project. And it doesn't have to be directly related to where the monies were collected. But most likely will have a relationship. So when we get now, roads is obviously very expensive service, and then we're going to get into the water and the sewer services. And I know that you're very aware of the cost pressures that have been incurred on these services. So with respect to water services, we've got a capital program that is in excess of $16.7 million. The vast majority of it is related to development. There are some improvements to the plant and improvements to some of the storage facilities that are part replacement or addressing existing needs. And so just over $1 million is removed. Once again, we see this program is meeting the needs of growth, probably out more like 2041. So we've got 7.9 million is being funded out to 2033, and the remaining 7.6 million will be funded in subsequent development charges. Once again, if you get a faster rate of growth, a part of that share will come forward into recovery as well. It's about the relationship. And so we've got a range of things here. There is some negative reserve fund balance related to some things that have already been installed. We've got some new linear infrastructure works, some water storage works, and some studying with respect to modeling, and also the master plan update. And there's just the water share there. Sanitary sewer is where you're really experiencing some significant cost pressures with respect to sewage treatment. I believe a report came through fairly recently. You can see this capital program is quite extensive at over $100 million, approaching $110 million. Hopeful that you'll receive some grants on that of 30 million that we've netted off. There is once again, some components of this will address overall plant infrastructure needs and make some improvements that provide benefit to the existing residents. So about 10 million has been removed. Important to recognize though, that'll have to be funded through your utility rates. And then there's about $1.8 million in the reserve that'll be applied to it. And then almost 17 million, in our opinion, is related to the development within this needs. That deals largely with the next upgrade of the sewage treatment plant. The subsequent phase increase really will provide capacity for much more development. And so there's a significant post-period amount here, some $50 million. This is an extensive program. This is reflecting the kinds of tender prices that you're seeing here and the cost associated with it. The projects themselves haven't changed all that much from previous background studies. It's more the costing side of things where we're seeing the pressure.
Question, Councillor Bartley.
Thank you, Mayor Kenner. Because we have the slide up, you've explained most of my questions. Only $17 million we can get in DCs for sewer, but that's only in the 10-year. So that explains that. Then we're going to have to go to our treasurer to see if that will pay for the loan and whether we get the $30 million. Having said that, you talked about a municipal wide DC rate does not affect sewer, correct? That's only urban DC rate.
Correct. So when I get to the slides on the rates, I'll explain that again, but through the mayor, only development within the water wastewater service area will pay those components of the charge.
Councillor Yuri.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Bartley alluded to the $30 million figure, and I'm just wondering where that figure came from. We know we're out there begging and pleading like everybody else, and nobody has a crystal ball as to what that looks like. So I'm wondering how you arrived at a $30 million figure, and I hope you're right. Actually, I hope you're wrong. I hope it's more, but I'm just wondering where that figure kind of comes from.
Perhaps Val's going to help me out here.
That is the grant application that we applied for.
We felt it was important to identify council's expectation or hope that there's some monies received there and to include it in this calculation. Obviously, if in the future you don't achieve that amount or it's higher, my recommendation back to you would be to review and amend your development charge rate for this service as necessary. And stormwater is a new component that we've introduced here as a standalone charge. You've got about $5.5 million, almost $5.6 million in costs, of which about 2.6 we've included in recovery, and that's for some very specific stormwater management work needs that are identified here. What I'm going to do now is summarize the capital programs and then move quickly into showing you what the rates are. I've grouped together the general services here, and you can see that we've got about 15.4 million in total capital works. And of that, the outer column, 4.2 million is what we're proposing to fund through rates over the next 10 years. And you can see for this group of services, the most significant part is Parks and Recreation. 2.4 of that is related to your Parks and Recreation needs. This is before we get into the big ticket items of your roads, sewer, and water and storm. So that program is some 116 million. And of that, 33 million is what we've included as it being related to and eligible for recovery over the next 10 years. So you can see that this is the significant program, and the sewer charge is about half of that amount. It's 16 million, almost 17 million. So I'll move right into.
Question. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I'll ask a question you can't answer. When you put in these categories, I was curious as I was going through the appendix report and noticed at that point that the museum and Meaford Hall, for example, are not in there. So I literally went to the act to look and find out why not, and found out that it literally says that the provision of cultural and entertainment facilities, including museums, theaters, blah, 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 aren't included, but libraries are. And the only question I had related to that was because Meaford Hall is technically a theater, but it is also more than that. It is also a community service building, i.e. like a library, but it's, so I'm just wondering, not that again, put you in the spot to answer, but where's the logic in that from the governing bodies that say that, because Meaford Hall is a big ticket item to us as well, and DC charges would certainly be an asset to that maintenance and ongoing, whatever, but any idea as to why that's not included in the kind of the mandate?
Yes, through the mayor. I didn't spend as much time on the legislation as I could have, because I could spend an entire hour talking about that or more. One of the changes that has occurred, going back to Bill 23, is that we now have a list of prescribed eligible services. So there's a list in the back in the legislation that says these are the services that you can fund. Library being one of them. All of the services that we have here are prescribed list. The legislation before was, well, the original 1989 Act, if we want to go back to it, had no listing of services. Basically said anything that you do, and if there's a growth-related impact, you can fund it. So we had museums, we had cultural facilities, we had all of those things. The Act was fundamentally changed in '97, a new piece of legislation. It gave us a list of ineligible services, which included museums, theaters, art galleries, those kinds of activities. Interestingly enough, that list is gone now as well, but we have this very prescribed list of services. And so that kind of cultural facility does not fit within any of the eligible services under the legislation now, which is the short answer, or maybe long answer, as to why we don't have it in there. I've been doing this for a while. I've lived through all the legislation from the '89 Act. So let's talk about the rates. I think this is where the rubber hits the road, so to speak. So what we've got here, as I indicated, and these are the residential charges, we actually calculate a charge per capita. And then what we do is we multiply it against the occupancy pattern by unit type. So the charge per capita then for the general services is some $6,053 per capita. So this is to that earlier point. If you're developing in the rural area, you're not on water wastewater services, but obviously you're benefiting from roads. You would pay a charge for a single or semi-detached unit of $15,923. And that's the 6,053 multiplied by 2.63 persons per unit. Yeah. The number down at the bottom there. And then if you're on municipal water wastewater services, one or both, then you pay $3,500 for the water and almost $7,600 for the sewer, and a total charge of $17,141. So if you're on full municipal servicing, water, wastewater, the charge for the single detached unit is 2.63 times 17,141 for that charge of 45,094. What that means is if a developer comes in and they're doing a 10-lot subdivision of single detached homes, they would pay 10 times the 45,094 or 450,000 roughly for building those 10 homes to help pay for the construction of that infrastructure. And then if you're building rows or townhouses, and these are mostly townhouses or multiple units, the average occupancy is 1.5 persons here in the town. That would be a charge fully serviced of $25,712. And then we have a nursing home charge here, which is done on a per bed basis. And of course, we're assuming one person per bed. And so the charge is $17,143 per bed. And you can see that the major pieces of that charge are the sanitary sewer at 44% when you're on the fully serviced, 21% for the water, but the roads is also important at 14% and the parks and recreation at 10%. It's really those four services that result in the predominance of the charge. I'm going to hold off questions on the rates until we get to the comparison of the rates with your current charges, and then we can get back to it. I want to round out with talking about the non-residential charges as well. And so the charge is levied on a per square meter of gross floor area basis, and the charge that we've calculated for industrial or employment land kinds of uses is $150 a square meter. All other non-residential activities, which is largely your retail, commercial kinds of things, the charge is $287.24 per square meter. So we're getting into some fairly significant charges there on the non-residential side. Now I'm going to show you a comparison with your current rates. And I'm going to pause here and look at Val for a moment. The 22,632, the current charge, have we got the indexing in that or not? No. Yeah, I'm just not sure whether I've got. The rates of just index. Every year you can index the charges for what we call the change in construction costs, which is guided by a StatsCan index, and it's about 4.65%. So these rates are actually, the 22,000 is a little bit higher than that. But just for the purposes of right now, and we'll fix that up for the public meeting, is the current charge at 22,632 going up to just over 45,000, basically a doubling of the rate. I think that maybe is the current rate then, or with the indexing. Yeah, it is with the indexing, I believe. And so we're pretty much doubling the rate from where it is today. Recognizing, as I tried to allude to at the beginning, it's, in my opinion, and I've been working with the town for since at least 2010, I think. For the last 10 years, we have not done a fundamental review of the capital costs associated with these programs, especially in the last 5 years. And so what we're doing through this study is really bringing the cost of constructing primarily the water and the sewer and the roads up to what the costs are associated with delivering that infrastructure today. And we're seeing these cost increases everywhere. I'm sure you saw all of the news around the Collingwood plant, water supply plant coming in. We had it originally at about $60 million, then we put it at 100 million, and the low tender came in at 265 million, all within a period of a few years, right? And that's having significant consequences on both Collingwood's development charge rates and New Tecumseh's, because they share in that supply. Likewise, I work with the town of Blue Mountains, the mayor was here, we had to pass through significant increases in their development charge rates, primarily driven by the cost of the water and sewer infrastructure. And it's just these tenders are coming in at significant amounts. Innisfil opened up their wastewater treatment plant, and it came in 50% more than what we had estimated just a year earlier. And we're at the whims of what this is. I hope that after the pandemic, things started to settle down. The increases are slightly less, but we're not returning, we're not seeing decreases post-pandemic. So that's really what's driving that. And I've taken a little bit of my back end story out of it, but I thought seeing as we were there, I would comment on it. Non-residentially, and this is the commercial retail, once again, we're seeing almost a doubling of the charge. So going from 152 up to 287. And then the industrial charge likewise is almost doubling, going from 81 up to 150, slightly less. So why don't I share some rate comparisons with other jurisdictions, and then Mayor, I can pause and we can take some comments and discussion. What we've got up here is a slide comparing you with some neighboring jurisdictions and then some other jurisdictions sort of in the broader, including some Simcoe County representation here. The lower yellow marker going in is showing you your current rates. And the first part of the bar that's, I think, colored yellow or gold for most of us is the county's charge. And then the red piece is your charge. And you can see that what's happening through these increases is that you're moving up into the middle of this pack rather than being in the low middle part of it. And you can see that there's other municipalities like Wasaga Beach, like Springwater and Elmville that are very comparable to yourselves, but you're higher than places like Owen Sound. And then you're significantly lower than some of the rates in some of the different service areas in Blue Mountains. They have a number of different service areas of reflecting linear infrastructure cost differentials. You're also sharply lower than what we see in Barrie and Innisfil and some of the South and Central Simcoe County municipalities. But you're providing the same services and you're experiencing the same cost pressures. When we go to the non-residential side, and this may cause some caution or some pause, you can see that you're in that sort of lower to middle pack right now, but with these increases, you're going to see you moving up to the very high end of that spectrum. That can be a factor of a number of things. Some of the municipalities haven't undertaken these updates yet. Some of them will have done some discounting on the non-residential charge, especially when it comes to the This is just the non-residential, but industrial charges often get discounted, and there's some differences with the non-residential. But you can see it's also the banding is a little bit tighter. It's not as extensive in terms of the differentials that we saw on the residential. Happy to take some questions on what those pressures might be and what council's ability has to deal with those, because there could be some concern. Because in my opinion, residential development is less sensitive to upfront capital costs like development charges. There's some forms of non-residential activity that are more sensitive to initial capital costs, including development charges, land acquisition costs, and such. So there may be some cause there just to have a pause and looking at those increases. One of the things that we were talking about internally together with your staff and just thinking about recognizing that doubling of these rates may cause some reaction of your stakeholders, primarily those in the development industry. So I just wanted to give some thoughts as to, what is it that's causing this and why are development charges important? As I alluded to very early on, development charges are critical for the funding of development-related infrastructure. And importantly, water, wastewater infrastructure is critical to allow that development to occur. And the investment in municipal infrastructure and water and wastewater has a direct positive impact on the land values that the development industry receives and on the marketability and delivery of their homes. Obviously, without that infrastructure, they probably couldn't develop to the extent that they want. And we're just seeing that cost pressure. As I've alluded to or mentioned, we haven't done this fulsome review for some period of time, so there's some catch up here in the unit cost. The projects themselves have not fundamentally changed from what they were 10 years ago. But it's just doing the cost detail and recognizing where the pressures are today. And I just want to stress with you, over the last 4 or 5 years, seeing a doubling of the rates is pretty consistent with what I've seen elsewhere. Even in places where we've been doing more frequent updates, just the pricing pressures that went on through the pandemic, and really they were there before. But the pandemic just made it even more, the cost pressures just went up and it has not eased off. And what we're seeing here is we're just catching up to where you need to be. So the important thing to recognize is, I think we want to express to the development industry that you're keen to work with them to deliver this core infrastructure, but it has to be in a fiscally responsible and sustainable manner for the municipality. Recognizing that if you don't implement the fully calculated rates, there's really 2 consequences. One is that you ask your existing ratepayers and taxpayers to pay for that portion that you're not going to fund from development charges. The only other option is to change the capital program and remove some infrastructure, and some of it you're not going to be able to. You're going to have to expand your sewage treatment plant. You're going to have to do improvements to the water. You've got to build that linear infrastructure. Other areas, if you choose to reduce it, like parks and recreation, will be decline in service levels. And those are the hard choices, unfortunately, that you as elected representatives are going to be in the position of making. Just to wrap up, and then we can have some dialogue, is just the timelines. We've been having some meetings internally just so that your staff was aware of where things are at, given some of the changes that have occurred. The background study is ready to be released. I'm not sure if it's publicly on the website. It is now. So that's good. We're having this session today, which obviously puts it again initiates the public forum, in my opinion. There'll be the formal public meeting, and I think we'll also have opportunities to dialogue with members of the development industry and other stakeholders just to address their concerns. Typically what happens is that we'll get some written submissions from them, and we will provide responses to those. And if we feel that they've made some valid points and adjustments are necessary, we'll acknowledge those and we'll bring those back to council. And anything that we get before the public meeting, we haven't scheduled that yet, we'll do that. And even after the public meeting, if additional things become identified, we'll document all that, come back to council with the final bylaw and say, this is what we're proposing now, and this is how it changes to what I presented to you this afternoon, if there have been changes and why. So lots of information, but through you, Mayor, I'd be pleased to take any questions.
Sure. Questions, Councillor Bartley.
Thank you, Mayor Kentner. I will start and thank you. That's a really in-depth presentation, and I was wondering who was going to put all this together, but I thank you. 2 questions, if I may. I'm going back to the rate comparison residential. So Owen Sound is going to be about half of what we are, And could I basically say that's because their wastewater and water systems have been redone at a lower cost? Like it was $50 million for their plant, but it's up to date now. So they're not, that's the biggest difference there. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. And geographically, it's just different servicing abilities that they have there, and they're not faced with those same kind of plant costs that you are right now.
No, I realize that. And they have 3 times the people paying for it than the Meaford does. Having said that, there's 4 or 5, 6 different municipalities on the lower end. They were all in line up at Roma asking the same questions we were. I'm going to guess that their prices are all going to double and triple.
I don't think many of those have updated recently, and so they're going to see the same pressures.
And they were there in line up with us, so that's going to happen, and that's good to know. One last question. In 21, we had a DC study, and there was things missed. Is there anything missing in this one?
To the best of my knowledge, no. And we've gone back, I think 3 times we've done reviews, extensive reviews of the capital programs with each of the department people and through finance. Can I say that there isn't something missed or something that you're going to discover in a month from now that you need? That could happen. But to the best of our working knowledge, everything that's been identified to date that's development related is included in the background study and included for recovery.
I appreciate that. I couldn't find anything, but I'm not a resident professional. You are, so I thought I'd ask the question.
Any other questions? Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Mr. Binning, for the presentation. And it's a lot to get our head around for sure. This is a huge increase for us. And I'm just wondering from your experience, and I think I know the answer, but looking at those who have gone before us, so to speak, and raised their charges, we look at Town of the Blue Mountains in particular, our closest neighbor. And even at that number, it doesn't seem to have slowed down the growth. I mean, they are the second fastest growing town in the country. So I just wondered if that was sort of a consistent with other communities you've worked with, because I'm fearful that, you know, we're a community that's just starting to take off. We're just starting to see interest and investment in Meaford. And now, you know, we're forced to bring this substantial increase in our charges, and I don't want to see us lose momentum. So I just wondered if you could speak to what you're seeing in other municipalities who have had to make similar decisions to ourselves.
Yes, I'd be pleased to. And I recognize that members of your development industry may position things somewhat differently. Certainly my experience of doing this for over 30 years and looking at these kinds of changes and increases is that when you start to look at within sort of, I'll call them catchment areas or areas of influence, it's often the municipality that has the highest development charge rates that gets the highest rate of development, which seems sort of counterintuitive in some respects, but that's because they're the municipalities that are growing, they're the people that are being attracted there, and the house prices tend to be a little bit higher, but also just, so for the longest time, it was Barrie had the highest charges. Now Innisfil and New Tecumseh were up there because of their geographic challenges. Those 3 are all very similar, and their rates of development have not been negatively impacted by the quantum of the charge or the changes. There can be some short-term impacts. I think we need to acknowledge that developers have based their pro formas, and they probably built in an assumed real increase in the development charge rates. They may not have factored in a doubling of the rates. And so for projects where they're well into the pro formas and they've got their prices out there, it may be difficult for some of the pro formas to work. But overall, and this, you're still not at the upper end of these in terms of dynamic growing municipalities with water, wastewater infrastructure.
Councillor Urick.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to go back to the forecast summary, and I'm glad you explained the census population versus the population in new dwellings, because when I read it, I was like, okay, what's that? That was a good explanation. So my curiosity is the forecasting is based out to 2033. So right now we're playing with numbers that we have on the books, and we know right now we keep bantering about that we've got like 1,500 new potential residences in there. We know of that realistically, we know some that probably won't go through. We know some that are already in process. So I'm just wondering how the prognostication works, how, like, where you come up with the 1099 growth. Is that based on the actual numbers we have in-house now, or is that statistical analysis of kind of the growth in our area or provincial wide? Just based, I know we're all playing with crystal balls, so I'm just wondering which crystal ball we're using to kind of forecast this.
So the fundamentals of the development forecast itself are based on the modeling that was done for the county, because we undertook that work for them. So it's the same model. It's the same model because we do the forecasting for the province at the provincial level. And then that goes down into the sub-regional levels. And then from the regional or the county levels down to the local levels. So that modeling and the input factors and the drivers about migration, about rates of fertility rates, all of that is fundamental to the model that was created for the purposes of the county. But what we have done is that we've adjusted for the rate of development that you've been achieving, which is higher than what was built into the county forecast for Meaford, as well as we looked at the applications that are before you. And we haven't assumed that all of them are going to go within the next 10 years and fully built out, but we've tried to make an educated assumption about kind of rate of development that we think you'll achieve over the 10 years.
Councillor Greenfield.
Thanks, Your Worship. Thanks, Mr. Binning, for your report. A lot of very pertinent information. I mentioned to you before the meeting that over 15 years ago, when we brought in development charges, I think there was something like $7,000 or $8,000 for a resident, and there was grumbling at the time that, hey, you're never going to have another new house built, but that has not happened. I just hope the public, even though water, stormwater, wastewater, yeah, big ticket items, but I hope our residents don't forget about our rural roads. We have hundreds of kilometers of rural roads that and some of them are in disrepair. We've got something like 79 bridges in our municipality, and so it's widespread throughout all the regions. You mentioned that at the first early in your report appeals. How common have they been coming from the? I'm assuming the development. Community. I know our two council members on Grace Auble, I'm sure, have heard about appeals about new developments, but how common are they? I'm hoping developers will simply swallow the pill, but are we getting a big backlash in the province?
Yes, through the chair. I mean, it's so my experience is we do get appeals, most certainly. The Blue Mountain bylaws have been appealed. Barrie's were appealed. And more often than not, they get settled. So we go through a process of meeting with them, have more extensive dialogue. Sometimes that moves into more formalized mediation. And then we resolve those things, which does sometimes result in adjustments to the rates. Occasionally, well, bylaws do get appealed and go to the tribunal. I'm just at the tribunal now on the city of Mississauga and the city of Toronto bylaws, and those will not settle because of the nature of the appellant. But the Barrie one, we've had extensive discussions with them, and in the Blue Mountains, where we've had appeals in previous ones, we've never ended up at the tribunal. We've always sat down and settled it out, if that helps.
Any other questions? Did you have something, Kim?
It was just an ask, actually. Could you speak to how the affordability, we do have a developer and a couple of other developers interested in, keeping their affordability. But I know now that with this change that, and maybe you could just speak to that whole aspect.
Yes, I'd be pleased to through the mayor. So one of the other changes that was introduced through Bill 23 was the provision that the province was going to create an exemption from the payment of development charges for affordable housing. That has taken some time to come into fruition because it was dependent upon regulation, which really came into effect June 1 or July 1. And now the province is releasing data for each municipality, which identifies what affordable means. And there's affordability criteria for purchased homes and for rental. And if a developer is going to bring forward a property that is at or below that threshold as determined by the province, and it's a function of household mean incomes as well as local pricing, if they bring in a product that is going to be at or below that amount, and they're willing to enter into an agreement that it stays that way for a period of 25 years, they are exempt from the payment of development charges. And I'll bring forward more information at the public meeting to outline, to cover that off and to show what the threshold points are for Meaford.
Good. Look, thank you very much. That's very, very comprehensive and very helpful. It's not an easy subject to digest, but
my pleasure.
Moving on to the second item on our committee of the whole here. Pardon? Yes, we better vote on that. Absolutely. Sorry. We have the motion, which I read at the beginning, is simply to receive this for information purposes. So I need a mover and seconder for that. Pardon? Okay. Okay. Just vote. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. The second item, the Committee of the Whole received report development 2024-21, development of services, Quarter 2, 2024, activity for information purposes only. Can I have a mover and seconder for that? Councillor Forder and Councillor Bartley. Any discussion? All in favor? Pardon?
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, does anyone have anything to question about that? Sorry, go ahead. Okay. I thought this was pretty cut and dried, but.
Okay, I apologize. I did have a question. May I, Your Worship?
Yes, by all means.
And I think this question will be directed either to our CAO or to Denise, perhaps. On page 3, it talks about, if I can just pull it up here, different plans and so on. And at a prior meeting of council, members of council will recall there was a discussion about the new zoning bylaw, and that was going to take 1,400 hours of staff time. And I'm just curious to know now how we're going to go about achieving that requirement. And is there a deadline required from the province to complete that zoning update? Or are we going to have to hire a consultant, or just how are we going to make that happen?
Thank you for the question, through you, Mr. Mayor. So that was astute. So yes, that project is behind schedule, and we're retooling that based, as explained in the report, based on our resources we have. So one of the ways of doing that is to go just to the minimum requirements, which is just to update the zoning bylaw to be in line with our official plan as updated last year by the county. Technically, that was required within 1 year, so we are overdue on that. So the plan would be, if we were going to go to just sort of the minimum that we need to do to be in line with our Planning Act regulations and such, would be to just update what needs to be updated. So we started that with the ARU update. So that was step 1. And then the next could be just an implementation of our official plan and not a full delete and replace at this time. And then we can reevaluate that maybe in 2025. And there's a running list, I'll call it, of items that have been flagged by staff, just of those things that are challenges to work with in the zoning bylaw, things that maybe the interpretation is challenging, those sorts of things could be added as well. But we don't have a deadline yet of when we would bring that to you. But will be significantly quicker than the full delete and replace would be. Does that give enough detail for now, or would you like me to go a little further?
I think I'm fine for now, Denise. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Greenfield.
Thanks, Your Worship. On the building permit activity report here, it's on page 4, I believe, of 7 of the report. You have to help me, and I guess this is through you to Ms. McCarroll. Now, Denise, I know you're not a building inspector, but you're also familiar with building. The permits, the new homes, says the 2024 count thus far is 31 as opposed to only 14 at this time last year. Now, earlier in the report, it talks about 18 residential townhouses in the Loon Call subdivision. Are those 18 a part of the 31? Are they a part of that number?
Through you, Mr. Chair. That I don't actually have an answer. I suspect they are part of the 31 that are there. Some of them may have been from Q1. If that's information that you'd like to bring back, we could maybe do so once I've had a chance to confirm with building staff. Does that make sense?
That's more than fair. No, if indeed the 18 are a part of the 31, it's to me, I'm reading it as kind of a good news, not quite so good a news, because if you take those 18 out of the 31 and then compare them to the count of last year, it's about the same. So the dollar figures are up. That's good, but as I say, and maybe it's not a negative, but maybe not as positive as I was hoping. The big number that is increased substantially is agricultural, and that is really a big benefit. I'm not trying to put the report down as very good, but I'd really hoping by the end of the year there are a lot more new houses other than Loon Call, and I just want to take this opportunity to commend Loon Call. They're really going to town out there. It's great to see that.
Councillor Bartley, you had a question?
Just a comment. Thank you, Mayor Kentner. Harley, this is Q2 results. It's not year-to-date results. It's just for the quarter. So the first quarter is over and above that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I just wanted to clarify too, when each of the managers who worked on their sections may have taken a different approach. So when I did the planning section, I did year to date, just so we could see how we were halfway through. But I think the other two sections did just look at Q2. So if you're comparing, you may notice a difference there.
It's good to know. You ready to vote on this? All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. The memo on delegated authority is simply a memo. We don't have to vote on that. Updates from members appointed to county council committees and local boards. I'm going to start with Deputy Mayor Keaveney. Do you have a report?
Thank you very much, Your Worship. And yes, I do. County Council last met on July the 11th. It was a short agenda and we were adjourned by 11:40, which I think was kind of a record for us at county. There were some interesting reports, though. The Grey Bruce Board of Health minutes were addressed by Dr. Era, who reminded Council how focused the unit is on the current opioid crises. Consistent efforts by the unit and many other organizations sadly aren't moving the needle very much, though. We do anticipate the newly operational facilities at 14th Street in Owen Sound and at the Bayview Center will have a positive impact in the near future. An amended and restated bylaw was approved regarding a service agreement with the Grey Sauble Conservation Authority. This bylaw regards enforcement of the provisions of the county's forest management bylaw, which would permit the marking of trees on private lands. This service has been provided for the past 70 years. 41% of the funding for the GSCA comes from municipal levies, 6% from the province, and 53% is self-generated by the authority. So the marking of trees is one way that Grey Sauble can generate a small amount of revenue. In the consent agenda was an interesting report regarding the county's school litter pickup program, which has existed for over 20 years. Our GBCS is a participant in this initiative along with 3 other schools. Collectively, the students cleaned just over 300 kilometers of roads and earned a tidy sum of $15,054.38 shared between them. GBCS saw 100 students participating and they gathered litter on 26.36 kilometers of county roads and earned $1,334.34 for school projects. The Grey County OP Amendment 11 has moved past the OLT, finally. The concern between West Grey and Hanover over potential lands to be amalgamated by Hanover, including farmwoods owned by the Magwood family in West Grey, is still under discussion. No settlement has been reached as of yet. And this is quite concerning, I think, to the mayor and myself, because in this Amendment 11, at the county, there was a clause that suggested lands from West Grey be amalgamated into Hanover. And I think that's something that all of us need to be conscious of, because our neighbors could decide that they need to grow and could come after some of our lands. So this is something that we're following pretty closely. Deepika Gupta provided a report overviewing the GB LIP. That's the Grey Bruce Local Immigration Partnership. Collectively, GB LIP strives to build stronger communities through awareness, outreach, inclusion, and equity to ensure immigrants and newcomers become welcome members of Grey and Bruce counties. They assist newcomers as they try to join the local workforce with a focus on retention and support for family members, because what we find is that newcomers come into Grey, but after a short period of time, sometimes they migrate back to larger centers because there's more cultural acceptance for them there. A recent survey suggests that affordable housing and lack of access to healthcare are the 2 major concerns of new residents. No surprise there. The other concern is a challenge making friends and connections in new communities, and that's where GB LIP can really help. There's a partnership council that consists of 67 local organizations, and they're working hard to break down some of these barriers. Approval was granted by County Council for 2 staff from GB LIP to travel to Vancouver for the Pathway to Prosperity National Conference. GB LIP is funded by the province, and they are hosting a diversity and belonging conference at the Bay Shore Community Center on September the 25th from 8:30 to 4:45 p.m., with the keynote being delivered by Melissa Bryan. She's the founder and principal consultant of Rainbow Diversity Institute. So if anybody's interested in that, that again is September 25th. And if that's anything you'd like to add, Your Worship, please go ahead.
No, I just wanted, do you also have a report from the PSAC?
Absolutely could, but we also have Councillor Greenfield present. Would you like to speak to that, Harley, or do you want me to?
You go ahead, Deputy Mayor. I'll add if, although I'm sure there's nothing you will.
Thank you, Councillor Greenfield, and through Your Worship. Yes, our PSAC committee did meet last week on Thursday, and thanks very much to Kirsten, who's not present today, but for helping to lead that meeting. And what we did was discuss a number of different categories, and all members of the committee really participated. And we looked at concerns and challenges from our economy, the environment, social cultural concerns, construction issues, and regulatory process questions. And all of that information will be compiled. And TC Energy is coming to present to PSAC on August the 8th. And they've been invited to deliver a little bit of a what we called a coffee chat type presentation where they will provide an update on the project. And they won't necessarily have time to delve into all of the concerns that were brought forward from the different members at the meeting. But as time goes forward, we want to make sure that people have answers to all of those concerns, because as I stated at the meeting, myself anyway, as a voting member of this council, will not declare myself a willing host until all of these concerns have been addressed. So the only other news in relation to that is that there's still no word from the province. That had been anticipated at the end of July, and I believe the expectation is that that'll be a few more weeks after the change in ministers. So Councillor Greenfield, anything that I've missed?
No, it was very complete, Deputy Mayor. I just wanted to add that I was really impressed by the committee members. As the Deputy Mayor mentioned, a lot of items were mentioned, but I think I was really impressed by their openness, some strong feelings concerning the project, but everyone seemed to be more than willing to sit back and listen and learn. And that's, to me, what that committee is all about. That meeting on the 8th of August is a public meeting, and the TC people will be here. So we have room for gallery members if they want to sit in and listen. I know the committee is very, very, very interested in hearing what TC has to say, but the public is welcome to come and listen in. And I did have an accessibility committee.
You're next on the list.
If I may. The first accessibility committee meeting since last November. We were blessed to have Alex leading us through a number of the basics, which all the committees have been going through, the roles and responsibilities and code of conduct and so on and so forth. We were also joined by Sarah and Mr. Joby, and their presence was appreciated. We have 6 members, 4 of whom are new to the committee. They bring just a world of background to the chair, and yeah, it's we're going to be busy. Thank you.
Good. Were there any other boards? No. Okay. No others. Then I need a motion to move out of the committee of the whole. Deputy Mayor and Councillor Forder, and we're doing that at 3:10 p.m. Councillor motions. Any notice of motions? See none at the moment, and we do not have none to deal with right now. So we do have a adoption of minutes. Be it resolved that Council of the Municipality of Meaford hereby adopt the minutes of the council meetings held on July 8th, 2024, and the closed meeting held on June 24th, 2024. I need a mover and seconder, Councillor Bell and Councillor Bartley. You're ready to vote. All in favor? Sorry, you do have something to raise?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick comment on in the minutes there was a point talked about page 210. Sorry, bear with me. It just said I had asked about an update with regards to the signs for the sesquicentennial. Technically, they were with regards to the sign for the event signs in general. It was not just related to sesquicentennial. Just wanted to make sure that correction.
Okay, thank you. All in favor? That's carried. Is there anything on the communications agenda? Seeing nothing, that is the end of our regular agenda. We are going to move into a closed session next with the CAO, Director of Human Resources and Community Services, and the acting clerk in attendance. This will be to discuss personnel matters about an identifiable individual, and specifically it is the 60-day review of our new CAO, her performance review. So we will be back to report out of that meeting shortly. Thank you. Thank you, Deputy Mayor and Councillor Urick. We're adjourned. Okay, at 4:31, I'm just reporting out of the closed session we held this afternoon with CAO, Director of Human Resources and Community Services, and our acting clerk in attendance discussing the CAO's performance review, and that's all we discussed. And at this point, we've just got one more item of business. Recommendation be it resolved that bylaw 2024-40, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the Council of the Municipality of Meaford at its regular and special meetings held in the month of July 2024, be taken as read a first, second, and third time and finally passed. I need a mover and seconder for that. Moved by Councillor Forder and seconded by Councillor Barclay. Any discussion? All in favor? That is carried. And at that, I'll declare today's meeting adjourned.